and welcome to another edition of To The Point. Today, our focus is on India-Pakistan ties that are going through quite a tumultuous time. Prime Minister Modi's reference to the plight of people in Balochistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir in his Independence Day speech has marked a significant shift in stance as far as India's approach to Pakistan is concerned. Pakistan, on the other hand, is pushing its Kashmir case internationally, pointing to the recent unrest in the valley. So, where are India and Pakistan relations headed? To answer that question, I'm joined by someone who understands this India-Pakistan dynamic better than most. He is someone who, till the end of last year, was spearheading India's diplomatic engagement with Pakistan as India's High Commissioner to Pakistan, TCA Raghavan. Welcome to The Point.
Thank you.
Ambassador Raghavan, thank you so much for coming in. And for our understanding, I mean, because Balochistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and the plight of the people there is something rather new for the Indian audience to understand what really has been happening over there on the ground. You've been in Pakistan, in Islamabad, interacted with citizens over there. What is the nature of the problem in Balochistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir?
Well, in Balochistan, to start with, the problem is one of a major insurgency which has been in Balochistan for many years now. It has gone through its ups and downs. There are periods when it has been very intense. There are other periods when it has been relatively less intense. But nevertheless, the fact that there has been a full-blown insurgency in Balochistan because of widespread alienation, complete lack of development, and the absence of any political process.
Why is there that alienation? I mean, do they not identify themselves as Pakistanis? What is, in going back a little in history, I mean, my understanding says that Balochistan was an area that was annexed by Pakistan despite the people not wanting to be part of Pakistan.
The accession of Balochistan or the Khan of Kalat, the state of Kalat to Pakistan was disputed. And it was because of that disputed accession, because the Khan did not want to join Pakistan on the terms which were offered to him, and he received a fair amount of support from his people. That led to a military intervention and finally the accession of Balochistan. But because it was by and large not acceptable to many people in Balochistan, the seeds of the insurgency lie in that combination of circumstances.
All right. But would it be fair to then club what's been happening in POK with Balochistan? Is the problem very different, or is there that much alienation in POK as well?
Well, in POK, the range of problems are partly similar but partly different. What you've had in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir is really a region which has been governed from Islamabad or from Pakistan's capital itself. There is a general absence of political rights, there is an absence of human rights, there's an absence of judicial oversight and so on and so forth. There's also been a major entry of extremist groups and terrorist groups in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, primarily using it as a base to carry out operations in India.
So the Pakistani military, I would say then, is in control or at least runs POK to that extent?
That's a fair assessment. Okay. The Pakistan army calls the shots.
Okay. But coming back to the relations between India and Pakistan, what the Prime Minister said in his Independence Day speech. Now, many are viewing it as a hardening of stance, as a departure from a more dovish approach that the Prime Minister had initially adopted in his first 2 years in office, of even going out and reaching out to Pakistan, visiting Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif over there. Is this a hardening of stance, this reference to Balochistan and Pakistan?
Well, some observers have interpreted it as a slight hardening of stance. I would like to see it in a broader context. In my view, the Prime Minister and the government, from the very first months of their resuming office, sent out essentially a three-point message to Pakistan. The first point was that we want good relations, and we are quite prepared to go the extra mile to achieve a better, more meaningful relationship. And there are many examples of this. The invitation to Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to come to Delhi for the swearing-in, the Prime Minister's visit to Lahore in December 2015. But in between, there were a number of other initiatives. And in my reckoning, virtually the entire period between 2014 till now, virtually every initiative which has been taken for an improvement in relations has come from the government of India or from the Prime Minister directly himself. So the first point was we want good relations with Pakistan. The second point was that we will not tolerate infringements on the line of control. And don't interpret our intentions of having good relations as a license to carry out terrorist or extremist operations across the line of control or elsewhere. The third point was that as far as Kashmir is concerned, that while we are prepared to discuss all issues, please don't interpret our aim of having good relations again as a license.
Right.
If you want to discuss Kashmir, please come and talk to us. And it was precisely in those circumstances, if you recall, in 2014, a meeting was cancelled because the Pakistan government wanted to have a meeting with the All-Party Hurriyat Conference, which otherwise has no locus standi. So I think the present statement of the Prime Minister has to be seen in the context of this three-point approach. I don't think it's a radical change in position, but it's certainly giving a certain primacy to the point that if you want to have good relation with us, there are certain red lines you have to respect.
All right, but in terms of those red lines, now many analysts over here at home are also pointing out that in terms of those red lines only, India had a moral high ground over Pakistan, that India would not talk about what it said earlier were the internal affairs of Pakistan and would want that from Pakistan as well when talking about Kashmir. Do you think that India has lost that moral high ground, as some analysts are saying?
I don't think there's any equivalence between India and Pakistan. This is not just from the Indian perspective, but really you have to see Pakistan's position in the wider context, in the regional context, and also in the international context. If you see its relations with Afghanistan, you see the major frictions which they are with Iran, as also internationally the perspective that there are terrorist groups, extremist groups, which have a wide license which nobody wants to check. Or perhaps there is more than just license, there's a certain element of complicity and support from state institutions. So in that, given that particular perspective of Pakistan, that perception of Pakistan internationally, there's no question of a high ground, sharing a equivalence with Pakistan or trying to have a moral high ground. That question doesn't really arise. But this question of because Pakistan is interfering in our internal affairs, we have begun doing the same. I think that would be simplistic to say that. What the Prime Minister was doing was drawing attention to the human rights situation in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and this is something which is well known, as also the situation in Balochistan. But also, I think, saying, and it was a subtle hint, that please don't interpret our restraint as giving you a license to do and say what you want.
All right, but who's doing it in Pakistan's half? Because many times one argues that what's the point of even engaging with the civilian dispensation in Pakistan when they really do not call the shots as far as the India policy is concerned, with the deep state and the Pakistani army really calling the shots? Is that what has been at play? Or do you think the Pakistani civilian dispensation also saw an opportunity given the unrest in the valley and has really hardened its stance towards India?
Well, decision-making in Pakistan is difficult to interpret. How much of the input is from the army? To what extent does the army decide external policy? But by and large, on policy matters relating to India and to Afghanistan, it is generally believed that the Pakistan army does play a major role. On Kashmir, there is a sense of entitlement in Pakistan. This is something which we need to understand. They feel that commenting on Kashmir or carrying out operations in Kashmir should be seen as something different from India-Pakistan relations. And there is a background to this. To this day, most Pakistanis would not be prepared to acknowledge that the operations they began in 1965 in Jammu and Kashmir in the form of Gibraltar and Grand Slam could have consequences for the whole of India-Pakistan relations. So I think it is important that we check that sense of entitlement, that that while you are free to discuss whatever subject you want, that freedom should not be interpreted to mean that you can use terrorist groups to carry out attack, you can fund terrorists in India, you can give them all kinds of material support, etc., etc.
All right, but diplomatically, I mean, and you were there in Islamabad, off late with Pakistan, the amount of overtures that India has made has been quite significant, be it after the Pathankot terror attack, allowing their team and expecting reciprocity in that. That did not happen. Then you had the Prime Minister's visit that we've talked about. So in terms of India's perception of Pakistan, that we wanted good relations with Pakistan, have we gone a bit too far? And is it a little bit of an egg on the face, trying to pull back now?
I don't think there's any egg on the face. Okay. The facts on the ground are that you're the larger power, you're the most stable power, you're one of the most mature democracies in the world. That you will deal with your neighborhood. So we cannot insulate ourselves from that expectation, and also not acknowledge that Pakistan has been going through a very, very bad period in the last 15 years of its history. A lot of these problems which it faces are self-created. There's no doubt about that. But nevertheless, these factors imply that you have to take a certain political stance, which means taking initiatives with Pakistan from time to time to see whether you can bring it around to a more reasonable position. Admittedly, many of these initiatives will not work, and they will continue to not work in the future also, as they have not worked in the past. But that still does not remove that onus of responsibility from you.
All right. The point that you made over there about things not being too good in Pakistan for especially the past 15 years, do you think that the way the Pakistanis are going about the Kashmir issue right now, trying to raise it at as many fora as possible, is it a diversionary tactic from internal problems?
It's not so much a diversionary tactic as it is the inability to change policy, regardless of the consequences that policy has for your own people and for your own economy and your own society. It's not just vis-a-vis India. If you look at Pakistan's policies vis-a-vis Afghanistan, they have been completely disastrous for its own society. The economy has suffered blows from which it will take a very long time to recover. There is a widespread feeling of insecurity and intimidation because of the wide license given to terrorist groups. Those negative consequences are very visible on the ground in Pakistan. But notwithstanding that, if you do not change policy and acknowledge that these policies are derived from a particular situation of the 80s which no longer exists, that means there is the mindset issue which the Pakistanis first of all have to tackle.
All right. Now, talking about the Indian mindset, in 2009, Sharm el-Sheikh happened, where the first time the reference of Balochistan came up between India and Pakistan. At that point of time, Dr. Manmohan Singh was heavily criticized, even from his own party, especially the opposition, then the BJP, now that the party is in power. So, in terms of the Indian diplomacy and its approach to Balochistan, do you think this was a continuation which the political dispensation uses, however it might?
I think, on the whole, as far as our neighbors are concerned, there's been a bipartisan approach. It may not appear so because of the cut and thrust of political rhetoric, but in fact there's a stronger continuity when you look at it in detail. What Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was trying to do then was to engage with Pakistan, and he felt, given the situation they had gone through, the loss of Benazir Bhutto in an assassination attack, numerous terrorist attacks in Pakistan, an economy which was going down the tube. He felt that notwithstanding the provocations to us in the form of Mumbai and other major terrorist attacks, he should still go the extra mile. That was his political assessment, and following from that, he took a number of steps leading to the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement. Now, of course, that agreement can be criticized for what it contains or does not contain. But I think, by and large, the overall approach is something which the political system in India accepts.
All right. Now talking about the message that has gone out, it's not just between India and Pakistan. This message obviously goes out to the international community as well. Some analysts point out that because of the China-Pakistan economic corridor that passes through these regions, India is trying to make a veiled message, send a veiled message to China as well, that look, all is not well, and we know that Balochistan is somewhere that you're also trying to come into Pakistan through that economic corridor. So just be a little aware.
I don't think there's any veiled message to China. It would be reading too much into this particular statement if you try to bring China also into the frame. What the Prime Minister said, to my reading, was something which is consistent with what he has been saying earlier. If you recall, the initial parts of his reference were really about the situation in Pakistan, about the lives which have been lost in terrorist attacks, and he referred to the very terrible terrorist attack in Peshawar and the spontaneous sympathy there was for that in India. And then he went on to hint at a dual policy towards terrorism, that this is a policy which you cannot, and he spoke obliquely, cryptically, it was more by way of hint. But what he was saying is that this dual policy has to be discarded, because you have to see the consequences for yourselves in terms of what is the situation in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and Balochistan.
All right. Let's also try to understand, how does this help India's case internationally, the reference to Balochistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, India's case with regards to Kashmir?
I don't think there's any case with regard to Kashmir which we need to make internationally. In my view, most countries are conscious of the fact that India and Pakistan have a difference of opinion about Kashmir, which they've had for a very long time. Most countries also feel that this is something which India and Pakistan have to resolve themselves. The new factor, and new in the sense of the last 15, 20 years, is the use of terrorism by Pakistan as the instrument of state policy, and no country in the world has any sympathy with that, because each of them in different ways has suffered the consequences of the latitude which these terrorist groups have in Pakistan.
All right, but then we do not see that change much in terms of, do you see that change much in terms of Pakistan's relations with the US or Pakistan's relations with China? That despite the fact that Pakistan uses terror as part of state policy, the allies are still there with them. Is India trying to move closer to the US, provide more strategic depth to the US vis-a-vis Pakistan and China?
I don't think so. I think most countries will continue to remain engaged in Pakistan for much the same reasons as it is important that we remain engaged with Pakistan. It's the 5th or 6th largest country in the world. It has a population of 200 million. It's situated in a strategically, geographically important cross points. And finally, it's a nuclear armed state. So nobody wants instability in Pakistan to reach proportions where the region and international stability itself gets affected. So other countries will certainly continue to engage with Pakistan, because in their assessment, they need the cooperation of the government of Pakistan as far as these terrorists and extremist groups are concerned. That logic applies for us also to some extent, at least. Pakistan is the immediate neighbor. It's a large country. Whatever happens in it has a direct implication on us. And therefore, at some stage, engagement is always going to be on the cards.
All right. So that engagement now between India and Pakistan, where do we see that going now? As somebody who's been privy to how this policy was planned and played out, how do we head from here? Do we see India and Pakistan relations reach a new low point, or do you see it continuing much in the same vein, a lot of rhetoric, but engagements would continue? For that matter, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley might not even go to Pakistan for the Finance Minister Summit, and Prime Minister Modi is expected to go for the SAARC Summit later in the year. That also happens in Pakistan. Do you see all this playing out, or the bilateral issues playing out in international fora and multilateral fora as well?
It's important we understand that not everything which happens in India-Pakistan relations is a function only of your policy. Domestic developments in Pakistan have a very major bearing on whatever happens in India-Pakistan relations. I think Pakistan is going to head in the next 3 or 4 months, perhaps it's already in the midst of that process of internal change. And most importantly, the fact that a new army chief has to be appointed. Now, transitions of this kind in Pakistan have always been turbulent. 2000 2013, when the earlier chief made way for General Rahil Sharif, was a turbulent period in India-Pakistan relations. Similarly, the Musharraf-Kayani transition was also a turbulent period in India-Pakistan relations. So it is not as if whatever we do or don't do is directly going to impact India-Pakistan relations. It will to some extent, but there are other engines at work, and one engine is the domestic situation in Pakistan. So that is something which we'll have to see what happens over there. As far as our further engagement is concerned, well, one item on the calendar is the SAARC summit, which is scheduled to take place in November. But there again, you have to realize it's not an India-Pakistan situation, it's SAARC. And what will happen in SAARC and how that summit will progress also depends a great deal on Pakistan's relations with Afghanistan and also equally of Pakistan's relations with Bangladesh, in which there's been a great deal of friction in recent months.
Yeah, interesting point you make over there about Bangladesh. The fact that while Home Minister Rajnath Singh had gone and had to face, in the diplomatic sense also, a few insults on Pakistani soil, Bangladesh did not even send their Home Minister over there. Absolutely. So, in all fairness, it's okay then for Finance Minister Arun Jaitley not to go to Pakistan because you might not know what Pakistan might do.
Well, I think I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that that the finance minister should not go. There are still some days left, and we have to carefully evaluate to what extent we want to bring in bilateral factors into a SAARC context. Much in the same way as the Home Minister had gone, notwithstanding the hostile reception he had and he received, he discharged all the responsibilities expected of him quite effectively. I think in that context, for the finance minister to go also should be considered.
All right, so final question, Ambassador Raghavan. India and Pakistan, tumultuous times indeed, especially given what has been happening in Kashmir. But as you're saying, there would be a transition in power in Pakistan and that domestic politics would face a lot of turmoil. So what should be the Indian approach? Is it a wait-and-watch strategy, or is it more engagement with Balochis and Pakistan and Kashmiris from Pakistani-occupied Kashmir elsewhere in the world? How do you see India moving forward on this?
I think India will have to approach it from first principles. And the most fundamental of those first principles is that Pakistan is going to continue to be our neighbor. Okay. It's a large country which has enormous implications for us. Just like France cannot dissociate itself from what is happening in the Mediterranean or in Iraq or in Libya, neither can Germany, neither can Turkey. Similarly, we cannot insulate ourselves from what is happening in Pakistan. We may say we will insulate ourselves, but it's not practically feasible. So at some stage, engagement will have to be part of the diplomatic toolkit. But the fact is that the present situation, given the evidence which exists of Pakistani involvement with terrorist groups carrying out attacks in India, it's not necessary that engagement means that it has to be at a consistent, same pace, broadband all the time. It can have its ebbs and ups and downs. And in that context, we should calibrate how much we want to go down the engagement route at this particular stage without ever, of course, resorting to the possibility of discarding the engagement route altogether.
All right, so you're saying engagement will continue, but at a pace that would be governed by various other factors other than what just India wants. Yes. Ambassador T C A Raghavan, thank you so much for coming in and helping us understand this dynamic of India-Pakistan relations from your unique perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for calling me. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that's it in To The Point for this week. We'll be back with another edition next week. Thanks so much for watching.